Fallujah, Iraq, November 2004. The first thing Mark Riley heard was the screaming. Not the kind that fades quickly or gets pushed aside by adrenaline. It was raw, ragged, and close. Close enough that he could smell blood and gunpowder mingling in the air. His boots hit the dirt as he leapt from the back of the Humvee, the heat already radiating from the shattered street. Fire cracked from somewhere ahead. Then came the thump of a mortar, not far. Not near. Just near enough to remind him that he was still very much alive and could stop being any second. "Cover left," he barked, pushing Private Gomez toward a collapsed wall, snipers still up. The city was a maze of rubble and shadows. Every window was a threat. Every rooftop a tomb waiting to be built. Charlie's squad had been running building to building for 8 hours. It was supposed to be a routine push to secure the sector. Instead, they'd walked straight into a hornet's nest. Riley ducked behind a stack of concrete slabs and pulled his rifle tight to his shoulder. A quick scan. Movement second floor, right side, broken window. His finger squeezed. One shot, then another. The shape behind the window folded backward. "Clear!" he shouted. But it wasn't. A scream cut through the comms. Corporal Jennings, the radio op, was down. His leg was shredded, soaked in red. The radio unit sparking beside him. Medic Riley yelled, already scrambling toward him. Bullets spat down from a rooftop like rain. Dirt sprayed near his boots. Gomez covered the angle as best he could, but they were pinned. Riley reached Jennings, dragged him behind a pile of bricks, and pressed down on the gushing wound. "Talk to me, Corporal," Riley said. Jennings tried to speak but only managed a groan. "Hang in, you stubborn bastard. You're not dying in this shithole." The medic, Banks, crawled in a minute later, breathless, face gray. He started working on Jennings' leg while Riley turned his eyes back to the firefight. "Whitaker's still inside," Banks said suddenly. Riley stiffened. "What?" "Lieutenant Whitaker. Building across the street. He went in with Foster and D'Angelo. No word since." That was over 10 minutes ago. Riley checked the sky, no air cover. Checked his wrist, no time. He looked at the busted radio, then back at the chaos. No one else was coming. It was them or no one. "Gomez," he called. "You're in charge here. Hold this spot. Stabilize Jennings. If I don't come back in 5, you pull out and head to fallback." "What are you—" Riley didn't wait. He dashed into the open, zigzagging through cover as bullets chased his heels. He dove through the blasted-out doorway of the building across the street and rolled to his feet. The stench of burned wiring and blood hit instantly. He stepped over glass and plaster. Rifle up, boots silent. "Whitaker," he whispered. A low grunt answered from deeper in. He followed it. In the rear hallway, behind a crumbling door, he found them. Foster was unconscious, crumpled under debris. D'Angelo had been hit in the chest but was breathing. And Whitaker, Lieutenant James Whitaker, was slumped against the wall, pressing gauze into his own side. "Took one," he said through gritted teeth. Riley moved fast, propped Whitaker up, yanked the debris off Foster, looped D'Angelo's arm over his shoulder. One by one, he started dragging them out. The hallway lit up behind him. A flash, then the pop of a grenade. Dust and plaster rained down, but Riley kept moving. His legs screamed in protest. He kept moving. He made it halfway across the street when the sniper hit him. The shot tore through his thigh. He dropped hard, barely cushioning Whitaker's head from the impact. Blood pooled fast, but he didn't scream, didn't stop. With a roar, Riley crawled the last 20 feet, dragging the men with him. Pain blurred everything. He bit down on his sleeve to keep from blacking out. When he reached cover, he slumped. Someone grabbed the wounded. Gomez shouted into a backup radio. "Evac inbound," he screamed. Riley smiled faintly. The radio. He pulled it from his pack and shoved it into Whitaker's lap. "Get them out," he rasped. The medic tried to lift him onto the stretcher. Riley waved him off. "I'll wait for the next one. You're bleeding out." "I know." He clutched the radio tight. Heard voices confirming evac. Heard the colonel's name. Heard his own, too. Then it all went black. He woke up 2 days later at a field hospital outside the green zone. His leg was a mess of staples and bandages. They told him he almost didn't make it. Told him he saved 3 lives. He didn't remember the medals they pinned. Didn't care. He just remembered the silence. Riley was never the same after that day. His body came back. His mind stayed behind. He was discharged 6 months later with a Purple Heart, a pat on the back, and some vague promises about veterans' support that never materialized. The war was still on, but his war was already over, and no one knew what to do with the ones who came back broken and too quiet to shout. In a folder somewhere in Washington, his name sat on a line next to the words, "Honorably discharged." But in Riley's head, it was simpler. He was a ghost with a heartbeat, and no one saluted ghosts. By the time Riley was walking again, sort of the war had moved on. New headlines, new battles, new names in the casualty reports. The world had a short memory for the ones who survived. He got back to the States in late 2005. Camp Pendleton was his last military stop. A final debrief, a final checklist, paperwork, appointments, a meeting with someone from a counseling unit who handed him a pamphlet titled Reintegrating with Civilian Life. The cover showed a smiling vet shaking hands with a man in a tie. Riley didn't open it. The last box to check was the one marked Exit Interview. It took 8 minutes. He signed where they told him to. They gave him a copy of his DD-214 and a laminated card that said, VA eligible. They said, good luck. They didn't say what he should do when the nightmares didn't stop, or how to explain to a potential employer why loud noises made him hit the floor. They didn't mention how hard it would be to sit still in a waiting room, surrounded by civilians talking about football and Netflix while his knee bounced like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. He went home to Kansas, back to a house that hadn't been his since his father died. The mortgage had defaulted 6 months before Riley's last deployment. His sister lived 3 states away, raising her kids and scraping by. So he crashed on a buddy's couch for a while, then another. Eventually, even the buddies faded out. Mark's a good guy, they'd say, but he's not the same, and he wasn't. His first job was at a hardware store, stocking shelves, unloading pallets, no pressure, until a forklift backfired and he dove behind the tool aisle before he realized what he was doing. He quit the next day. Second job was worse. Security guard at a mall, radios, noise, teenagers with backpacks that looked too much like IEDs. He made it 2 weeks. The third job lasted the longest night janitor at a high school. No people, no questions, just him, a mop, and the echoes of empty halls. He liked it. It was quiet. Then the district outsourced the job and laid him off. By 2010, Riley stopped pretending he had a plan. The VA system had his records but never seemed to have appointments. He sat in a clinic waiting room once for 5 hours before someone told him his referral hadn't gone through. He left and didn't go back. He tried getting a claim approved, filled out the forms, waited, got denied, resubmitted. More forms, more waiting, another denial. The process felt like a maze rigged to collapse around him. His old unit had a Facebook group. He never joined. Too many RIP posts, too many names that hit too hard. He stopped checking. That winter, his car broke down for good. He'd been sleeping in it for 2 months by then, parked on the outskirts of town, behind a warehouse where nobody asked questions. When the engine finally died, he left the keys in the ignition and walked away. He spent the next night in a bus station, the one after that in a laundromat, pretending to wait for clothes that didn't exist. Eventually, he learned the schedule of local shelters, who took in veterans, who didn't, when to line up, when to back off. He learned how to blend in, how to disappear inside the city he used to fight to protect. People passed him on sidewalks every day. No one saw him. He was another beard, another coat, another ghost with a cardboard sign. Sometimes someone would toss a few bills his way and say, "Thank you for your service." Riley would nod. He never told them what that service had cost. There was a particular bridge downtown Riley had come to trust. It didn't leak much. The concrete arch blocked most of the wind, and if you slept up on the narrow ledge near the southern abutment, you were out of sight from cops and bored teens looking to film another homeless encounter for views. That bridge became his base. He kept his gear rolled tight, military habits never left. Sleeping bag and a black trash bag, a cracked thermos he refilled at gas stations, a pair of gloves with the fingertips worn away. He stashed everything in a hollow behind the concrete wall, just above the runoff channel. You'd never know it was there unless you were looking. He never told anyone else about it, not even the other guys from the shelter line. Trust was a currency Riley couldn't afford. Days were about movement. Keep moving, don't draw attention, don't slow down long enough for someone to see you and ask questions. Especially not the wrong kind. He knew which convenience stores left expired food on the back steps. Which public libraries didn't ask for ID when you came in to warm up. Which janitors looked the other way when you rinsed your face in a bathroom sink. There were others like him, vets. Some clearly. Some just claimed it. Some talked. Riley didn't. He'd nod, share a smoke, but he rarely gave a name. He didn't want to talk about the war. Didn't want to talk about coming home. He couldn't explain the weight he carried behind his ribs, or the noise that never left his ears, or why thunder made him flinch, or why he couldn't eat if someone stood too close behind him. He couldn't explain why every night, when he lay on his back under the bridge. He thought about Foster's limp body in his arms, about D'Angelo's pale face, about the blood on his own hands, thick, dark, warm. He thought about Whitaker bleeding out next to him, refusing to scream, and sometimes he didn't sleep at all. It was in January, cold, brutal, and cruel when he found the kid. Riley was walking the alley behind a strip of stores. The grocery dumpsters had just been emptied, but sometimes the bakery tossed fresh stale loaves in a separate bin. He reached for the lid, then stopped. Crying! Quiet! Choked! He turned. A shopping cart was wedged between the wall and the back fence. In it, a child 6 or 7, bundled in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, dirty sneakers with no laces, cheeks flushed red from cold. The kid didn't speak, just stared with big, glassy eyes and hiccuped sobs. Riley scanned the alley. No one else. No blankets, no bags, and no adult in sight. He moved slowly, like approaching a feral dog. It's all right, he said. I'm not going to hurt you. Still no answer. He took off his coat thin, frayed at the cuffs, but warm enough and draped it over the kid. The boy flinched, then held it tight. Riley glanced back toward the street. Still empty? He didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. He'd seen that look before. War-aged faces quickly didn't matter if you were a man or a child. He sat beside the cart and waited. They stayed there until sunrise. Eventually, the boy fell asleep. Riley didn't. He kept his eyes on the alley, watching for threats, for questions, for people who'd ask things he couldn't answer. When dawn came, he left the kid wrapped in the coat with half a loaf of bread he'd pulled from a different bin. He didn't have anything else to give. He flagged down a beat cop 2 blocks away. There's a kid, alone, he said, behind Harlan's Market. The cop blinked, startled. What are you? Who are you? Doesn't matter, Riley muttered and turned away before the questions started. He never saw the kid again. Didn't know if the police came. Didn't check. That kind of hope hurt too much. He returned to the bridge, exhausted. His hands were numb. His body ached. But his head was quiet that night. Quieter than usual. Riley didn't think of himself as a good man anymore. Whatever goodness he had was stripped away, piece, by years of dirt, rejection, and memory. But sometimes, like that night, he remembered what it felt like to act without orders, to choose to help, to protect something small and vulnerable and scared, even if no one knew, even if it cost him, even if he was just a ghost in a city that had forgotten his name. It was the hunger that pushed him, not his own. He'd gotten used to that. Riley had gone days on nothing but lukewarm coffee and scraps from donation bins. He knew how to manage it. Drink water. Keep moving. Keep distracted. But this wasn't about him. 3 days after he left the boy wrapped in his coat behind the grocery store, he saw him again. Same hollow eyes. Same ragged hoodie. This time, in the back corner of the shelter line, curled up near a rusted pipe, knees drawn to his chest. No one else paid him any mind. Kids came and went, some with parents, some with ghosts wearing parents' skin, some alone. Riley sat across from him, at a distance. Didn't speak. Just watched. He didn't even know for sure it was the same boy. But the look, the way he curled into himself, the way his eyes scanned for exits more than help was the same. That night, the shelter turned people away again. Capacity hit. The kid disappeared into the dark before Riley could ask where he was going. The next morning was bitter. Wind howled down the alleyways like a warning. Riley stuffed newspaper into his sleeves for insulation and walked east toward the shopping district. He didn't have a plan. Just instinct. Behind Duffy's grocery, the same bread bin sat next to the trash compactor, locked now. Maybe too many people had figured it out. Riley rattled it gently. No give. He could go in, he thought, just walk through the front door, act normal, grab a loaf and pay, except he had 37 cents in his pocket and a piece of twine he used as a belt. The idea burrowed deeper. Not for him. He imagined the kid huddled somewhere, his stomach eating itself from the inside, counting cracks in the concrete to pass the time. A loaf of bread? That's all. Soft, plain, whatever was cheapest. He just needed to get it and go. Simple. He waited until the rush died down. Noon. Sun high. Fewer customers. One cashier on duty. Young. Distracted. Riley walked in with purpose, years of muscle memory carrying him like a man with errands to run. He moved past the shelves without looking up, found the bread aisle, picked a small loaf from the lowest rack, slipped it under his coat, turned toward the door, and walked. No sprint. No guilt. Just movement. He was almost there. 2 steps from the automatic doors, the cold air on his face. "Hey, sir." He stopped, turned. The cashier stared, phone already in hand. "You gonna pay for that?" Riley didn't answer. The man stepped out from behind the counter. "I said what's under your coat." Riley reached in slowly, pulled out the loaf, and set it on the floor. "Did you steal it?" the man asked. "A beat?" "Yes," Riley said. That was all. The police arrived 12 minutes later. He didn't fight, didn't run, didn't explain. They cuffed him in front of the store. He winced as they pulled his arms behind his back. Scar tissue in his shoulders flared white hot. He didn't say a word. The patrol car was warm. He hated that he noticed. At the station, they processed him like any other petty thief. Name, prints, mugshot. Riley gave his real name, but no address, no emergency contact. Just a tired shrug when they asked why. They listed the charge as misdemeanor theft. The value of the bread, $2.49. There were no prior offenses in their system, which seemed to annoy the desk sergeant. He wanted a pattern. Something to explain the quiet, cooperative man who'd taken a loaf of bread in broad daylight and surrendered like he wanted to be caught. They gave him a court date and held him overnight. He barely slept. In jail, the cold came from inside, not the air, but the tile, the way time crawled, the way no one said his name. He didn't belong there, but he didn't belong anywhere else either. In the morning, a public defender spoke to him through a plexiglass window. "You're lucky," she said, flipping through his thin file. "It's a low-level offense. You take the plea. You're out in 48 hours with probation." Riley stared at her. "What happens if I don't take it?" She blinked. "We go to trial. Waste of time. Honestly. They'll see your record well, your lack of one, and call it in your favor. But why not take the deal?" Riley didn't answer. She leaned in slightly. "Why did you do it?" He paused. "Then the bread wasn't for me." She softened a little, but only a little. "Still theft. Mark. Doesn't matter why, legally speaking." He nodded. "I'll take the trial." She frowned. "Why?" He didn't say, but in his head, the answer was simple. Some things deserve to be seen. The courtroom smelled like dust and cheap coffee. Second-floor municipal building. Pale walls, stiff wooden pews, everything beige, even the people. Riley sat alone at the defense table, hands folded, eyes cast downward. His public defender whispered things he barely heard, legal jargon. Procedural reminders. Don't say anything unless asked. She had 5 other cases that morning. Riley was the 5th. The prosecutor, young and confident, called it an open and shut case. Surveillance footage, witness testimony, no question of guilt, a loaf of bread taken, not paid for, and a defendant who confessed on the scene. But what nagged at her, and what no one voiced, was how clean his record was. Not just clean blank, not a parking ticket, not a juvenile offense, not even a prior ID scan. In the system, Mark Riley didn't exist until the day he stole bread. That's what made her pause, just briefly. She submitted her statement, asked for a conviction and a fine, set an example. She said, "Intentional theft, even of something minor, is still theft." The judge nodded, then turned to Riley. "Mr. Riley, Do you have anything to say for yourself? He looked up, and for the first time he spoke. Serial number 519630, U.S. Marine Corps. Honorably discharged. The courtroom fell quiet. Even the judge's pen stopped mid-scribble. She looked at him again, really looked. You served. Yes, ma'am. For how long? 8 years, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. The prosecutor blinked, caught off guard. That hadn't been in the file. The judge turned to the public defender. Why wasn't his service disclosed? The defender flipped through her notes, flustered. He never mentioned it. Your Honor, the judge sighed. Mr. Riley, do you have your discharge paperwork? No, lost it. Do you have any identification, anything? Riley shook his head. His name had been enough. Once. Before people stopped asking for more than ID scans and signatures, the judge leaned back. We'll need to verify this. She motioned to the bailiff. Run his name and serial through military records. Start with the DoD database. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes Riley spent staring straight ahead, unmoving. 20 minutes while clerks shuffled papers and court staff whispered behind closed doors. When the bailiff returned, he didn't speak at first. He just handed the judge a folder. She opened it, read, her brow furrowed, then lifted. Sergeant Mark Riley, enlisted 1996, deployed Fallujah, 2004, Purple Heart, Navy Commendation Medal, discharged 2006 with honors, last known address, listed as unconfirmed. She looked back at him. Sergeant Riley, is all this correct? He nodded once. And yet, you stole a loaf of bread. He didn't answer. She pressed, quieter now. Why? He paused, eyes steady. There was a kid, cold, hungry. Yours. No. The judge closed the folder. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her seat, now realizing what she'd stepped into. This case is no longer an open and shut misdemeanor, the judge said firmly. It's a question of what happens when we send men to war, then forget about them when they come home. She turned to the public defender. You're filing for a reevaluation of circumstances. Today. Then she looked at Riley again. You should have been seen long before this. Sergeant. Riley didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded. Because finally someone had said his name. Colonel James Whitaker had been retired for almost 5 years when the email hit his inbox. Subject court case mentioned former Marine, Riley. Mark Sergeant, it was from a civilian aide who occasionally scanned local news clippings for the Veteran Assistance Board. Normally, they filtered out the noise traffic citations. Petty theft, minor arrests, but something in this case made the aide pause and flag it for review. Whitaker almost didn't open it. Most of those stories were too common now, a sad reminder of how many names had fallen through the cracks. But then he saw it. Riley, Mark, and just below it Fallujah, Purple Heart, no fixed address, trial for theft of food. He froze. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade, but it came back like gunfire. Riley? Sergeant Riley? The guy who dragged 3 men out of a burning compound under active fire while bleeding from his leg. The one who stayed behind to keep the comms open. The one who bled out next to Whitaker on a medevac chopper and wouldn't let go of the damn radio until he passed out. Whitaker had assumed Riley was dead for years. Everyone had. But now here he was alive, apparently on trial for stealing a loaf of bread. Something hard and ancient twisted in Whitaker's gut. He stood up from his desk, ignoring the ache in his back. He went to the old footlocker in his closet, pried it open. Inside faded photographs, worn dog tags, a journal, a stack of yellowed debrief reports. He flipped to one. Operation Iron Strike Charlie Squad Casualty Sergeant Mark Riley W.A. Non-fatal. Status Honorable Discharge. VA Recovery Program. Enrolled. Except it clearly hadn't stuck. Whitaker sat down slowly, the file in his lap. He didn't owe Riley anything. Not by military law. Not by duty. But that wasn't the point. Some men you don't leave behind no matter how much time has passed. By the end of the day, Whitaker had tracked down the courthouse clerk, verified the trial date, and arranged to be present. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet request for access to the hearing. He pulled his dress blues from the back of the closet. They still fit, just barely. That night, he wrote a short note to his wife. Mark Riley's alive, in trouble, going to see him. Jay, he didn't explain more. She wouldn't ask. She knew what Riley had done. She'd seen the scars Whitaker brought back, the ones Riley helped save. The morning of the trial, rain fell in sheets. It was the kind of cold that made joints creak and bones feel hollow. Whitaker stepped out of the rental car and squared his shoulders. His medals caught the gray light under his coat. As he approached the courthouse, people moved instinctively out of his way. Not because of his rank, because of his presence. There was still steel in the way he walked. He didn't check the courtroom number twice. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where he was going. When he opened the doors, silence rippled through the room. The judge paused mid-sentence. The prosecutor turned. The public defender blinked. Riley, seated at the defense table in a threadbare suit, didn't move. Then Whitaker marched forward, past the pews, past the jury box, past the murmurs. He stopped 3 feet from Riley and saluted, a crisp, silent, perfect salute. Riley looked up. His eyes widened, but only for a moment. Then they narrowed, like a man waking from a long dream and realizing something true he'd been seen. "Colonel," he whispered. Whitaker didn't say a word. He didn't have to. "Colonel James Whitaker," the judge said, still recovering from the sudden shift in gravity that had entered her courtroom. "Please state your reason for being here today." Whitaker stood tall, hands behind his back, medals gleaming under the harsh lights. He looked like a monument. "I'm here to speak for the defense, Your Honor," he said. The prosecutor immediately rose. "Your Honor, this witness was not disclosed. And the relevance." "Sit down," the judge said without raising her voice. The room hushed again. Whitaker stepped forward, eyes scanning the gallery, then settling on Riley, thin, pale, silent, a man barely tethered to this world. He nodded once, then turned to the court. "I first met Sergeant Mark Riley in 2003. Fallujah. I was his commanding officer. I watched him take leadership of a fire team after his squad leader went down. I watched him clear buildings with nothing but a flashlight and a sidearm. I watched him drag 3 wounded men out of a bombed-out compound, with one leg half destroyed and no backup. And I watched him lie on the floor of a medevac chopper, bleeding into the hull, still trying to call in enemy positions so someone else wouldn't walk into the same hell we had." He took a breath. "You don't forget a man like that." The prosecutor tried to recover. "Colonel Whitaker, your respect for the defendant is noted. But with all due respect, this is a theft case. Your testimony doesn't change the fact that he broke the law." Whitaker turned toward her. "No, it doesn't, but it explains why." He walked slowly toward the jury box. Sergeant Riley didn't come home to parades or promises. He came home to a system that put him in a chair, handed him a pamphlet, and shoved him out the door. His VA appointments vanished. His disability paperwork was lost. The benefits he was promised never reached him. He looked toward the judge. "That's not his failure, that's ours." Riley sat motionless, jaw tight. His public defender tried to say something, but Whitaker raised a hand. She let him go. He turned to the jury. "I've seen young men break under pressure. I've seen some take their own lives, and others slip into drugs, jail, or worse. Sergeant Riley didn't do any of that. He fought to stay human. He survived with dignity, even when the world turned its back on him." Another pause. The bread he took wasn't for him. It was for a child, a homeless kid he didn't know. He gave the boy his coat and stood watch all night in an alley so someone else might make it to sunrise. You can call it theft if you want. But if that's a crime, then maybe this whole courtroom needs to be indicted. Silence. Even the bailiff looked shaken. The prosecutor didn't speak again. The judge finally leaned forward, elbows on the bench, her voice low. "Sergeant Riley, do you wish to speak?" Riley stood slowly. His knees popped. He looked up, not at the judge, but at Whitaker. Then he turned to the jury. "I didn't want to be seen anymore," he said. "I thought I was better off invisible. But that kid, he was smaller than me, had less than me. I didn't do it because I'm good. I did it because no one else was there." He sat down. That was all, but it was enough. The judge called for a recess. The jurors left quietly. No one whispered. No one rolled their eyes. Something had shifted. Something real. When court resumed, it was quick. The judge looked at Riley, then at Whitaker. "Mr. Riley, I find you guilty of theft. That's the law. But I also find the sentence of this court insufficient to address the greater failure at play here. Your punishment is hereby reduced to time served." She paused. "You are released into the custody of Colonel Whitaker, who has volunteered to provide housing, reintegration assistance, and support." She leaned back. "I suggest we don't fail you again." As the gavel struck, Riley didn't move. Whitaker stepped beside him, offered a hand. "Ready, Sergeant." Riley stared at it for a second. Then he stood. Not tall, not proud, just upright, steady. For the first time in years, Mark Riley walked out not as a ghost, but as a man someone still saluted. The sky looked different on the other side of the courthouse doors. It wasn't brighter or clearer or filled with some metaphor about new beginnings. It was gray, just like it had been when he walked in. But for the first time in a long time, Riley wasn't staring at it through bars, windows, or the gaps under a bridge. He was standing in the open, next to Whitaker, and he didn't know what to do. They drove in silence for most of the ride. Riley sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Whitaker's black sedan, hands clasped in his lap. He stared out the window, watching the city drift past the same streets he'd wandered for years. But from a new vantage point, a new altitude. He half expected to see himself on a corner somewhere, still waiting for the shelter doors to open. Whitaker didn't press him, just drove. "Eventually," he said, "you'll stay in the guest room. Clean bed, door locks from the inside, nobody'll bother you." Riley nodded. "I'm not offering charity," Whitaker added. "I'm offering a second chance. You earned that, not because you saved my ass, but because you never stopped showing up no matter what the world took from you." Riley glanced at him, said nothing. "Not yet." The house was quiet. Too quiet. Big porch, clean walls, a kitchen with working appliances. Riley kept touching things like he was testing if they were real. The coffee maker, the towel rack, the bedspread. He didn't unpack. He didn't have anything to unpack. Just a paper bag with a change of clothes, a worn VA ID card, and a folded picture of his unit, creased in 4 from years in his coat pocket. He laid the photo on the nightstand. 3 of those men were dead, 1 missing. 2 disappeared into addiction. He was the one on trial for stealing bread. That night, Riley couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. The silence too thick. He got up and paced. Ended up on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping lukewarm coffee. He didn't smoke anymore, but his fingers still fidgeted like he wanted to. He watched the sun come up without blinking. The next week was a string of small mercies. Whitaker drove him to the VA personally, sat beside him during intake. When the clerk asked for documents Riley didn't have, Whitaker leaned over the counter and spoke quietly but with the force of command. Things moved faster after that. Within 72 hours, Riley had an appointment with a trauma counselor. Within a week, he was on a list for transitional housing and job training. Whitaker offered to fund the gap between services. "I'm not doing this as a favor," he said when Riley tried to protest. "You're not a project. You're a Marine. We take care of our own." Riley wanted to say thank you. Instead, he nodded again. That was all he could manage. Therapy wasn't easy. The counselor, Dr. Marquez, was a calm, patient woman who never asked too much too fast. She let silence hang in the air, not afraid of it. At first, Riley just sat there, session after session. He said nothing. Then a few words, then fragments. She never pushed, and one day, something cracked. He told her about the kid in the alley, about the bread, about waking up in the middle of the night expecting gunfire and finding only his own breathing. "I didn't want to die," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to keep existing like I didn't." She said nothing for a long time. "Then you're not invisible anymore, Mark, even if you feel like it." He started volunteering at a shelter not far from where he used to sleep. He didn't tell anyone who he was, just asked if they needed help cleaning up after dinner. The first night, he scrubbed trays in silence. A teen passed him and said, "Thanks, man." Riley didn't answer, but he kept coming back. One afternoon, Whitaker found him sitting on the porch with a small coat folded in his lap. "Picked it up at the surplus store," Riley said. "Figured the kid might still be out there." Whitaker sat beside him. "You may never see him again. I know." He paused. "But if he is, I want to be ready." He was still quiet, still thin, still carried ghosts in his eyes. But the weight had shifted. It wasn't crushing him anymore. It was something he carried upright. The boy was there again, It had been nearly 2 months. Riley wasn't expecting to see him. He'd stopped hoping. Really. People moved fast when they lived nowhere. Got transferred, lost, forgotten. But there he was, sitting at a long folding table in the corner of the shelter cafeteria, holding a juice box like it might disappear. Riley froze in the doorway. Time didn't stop, the trays still clattered, conversations still echoed, but something inside him did. Same hoodie, cleaner now. New laces in his shoes, still too thin. He didn't approach right away. He waited until after dinner, after the volunteers started stacking chairs and wiping down surfaces. Then he walked over, crouched beside the table. "Hey!" The boy looked up. His eyes narrowed for a second, unsure, then widened. "You again," he said. Riley offered a small smile. "Yeah. You warm enough now?" The boy tugged at the sleeves of his hoodie. "Better." Riley reached into the cloth grocery bag at his side and pulled out a coat. Navy blue. Weatherproof. The same brand as the one he'd given up that night behind the store. Only this one was brand new. "This is yours. If you want it." The boy hesitated, then took it, not with a thank you. Just a quiet nod. Like a soldier accepting gear before heading back into the unknown. That was enough. 3 weeks later, Riley got a part-time job at a nonprofit that worked with veterans. Admin support, filing, organizing, making coffee. Nothing glamorous but steady. He'd stopped flinching at the sound of closing doors. He could sleep 6 hours a night, sometimes more. And he'd learned how to say his name without shame when people asked. He still wore his scars like armor, but they didn't own him anymore. On the anniversary of Fallujah, Whitaker invited him to speak at a local VA event. Riley almost refused, but then he looked in the mirror and saw something different. Not a ghost, not a case number, not a failure. Just a man still standing, so he said yes. He stood at a podium in front of 50 people, hands steady, voice low. "I'm not here to talk about war," he began. "I'm here to talk about what happens after, about the years no one tracks, the nights no one asks about, the silence nobody sees. I was lost for a long time, not because I wanted to be, because no one looked." He paused, scanning the room, but someone did, and that changed everything. Afterward, people came up to shake his hand. Veterans, wives, kids. A teenager who looked him in the eye and said, "I think my uncle went through the same thing. Thank you." Riley just nodded. No long speeches, no explanations. But inside, something clicked into place, a piece that had been missing for years. That night, he returned to the bridge where he used to sleep. It was empty now, quiet, just wind and water and concrete. He left a single item behind the coat he'd been wearing the day he was arrested, folded neatly on the dry side of the ledge. A marker, of sorts. A quiet salute to the man he used to be. The man who kept surviving even when no one noticed. Then he walked away. No orders this time, just one decision. Keep moving forward. The story of Mark Riley offers a hard, necessary lesson about what we owe to those we send into harm's way. It reminds us that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off, that honor isn't just medals and ceremonies, but how we treat the wounded when the crowd goes quiet. Riley didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because the systems meant to catch him didn't. His trial, and the quiet dignity with which he carried it, confronts us with a question. Are we truly seeing the people we walk past every day, or just letting them disappear? In the end, compassion isn't charity, it's justice. Thank you for spending your time with us and walking through this powerful story. If it moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about the unseen struggles veterans face, we ask that you subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support this kind of meaningful storytelling. Your voice matters too. So let us know in the comments what this story meant to you, and what kinds of stories you'd like to see more of. Your feedback helps us create content that matters. Until next time, stay aware, stay human, and stay connected.